Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Ayşe Süberker. July has been one of the deadliest months for Syria this year. More than 100 people were killed in just 10 days as the Syrian regime stepped up its air raids on civilian areas. Their target of choice? Hospitals. The bombing of medical facilities in the last rebel stronghold of Idlib has also left dozens of children dead. The indiscriminate targeting of civilians was enough for the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres. He said the United Nations would launch an investigation into the attacks on health facilities and other civilian areas. Just hours after that statement, the Syrian regime offered a conditional truce in the country's last rebel bastion. The offer came during the latest round of Syrian peace talks that were taking place in the Kazakh capital, Nur-Sultan. The head of the Syrian opposition delegation, who was attending the talks, said later that the opposition had reached a ceasefire deal with the regime.
After long discussions and difficult negotiations, we thank God that we have reached an agreement on a ceasefire which will stop this crime of the century, with assurances from the guarantor countries that the deal will be applied.
The Syrian regime stepped up its offensive against Idlib in April. According to the United Nations, the constant bombardment has forced more than 400,000 people to flee. And joining me now is Dima Musa, who is the Vice President of the National Coalition for Syrian Revolutionary and Opposition Forces, and Navar Saban, who is a political analyst at the Omran Center for Strategic Studies based here in Istanbul. Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. It's good to have you here. Well, civilian deaths, especially for children, has risen dramatically in Idlib. And the regime says the attacks were in response to the violations of ceasefire. Navar, I want to start with you. Do you agree with this? And why is the regime targeting hospitals?
Okay, so basically when we start saying the regime is not able to start anything by itself. This is like a Russian campaign. This is something done and created by the Russian. So anyhow, they started this campaign saying that the one of the DMZ agreement point did not happen, which is like reopening the international road, reopening the M5 and the M4. This was their main issue or their main thing that they tackled for this attack. And then they said, as usual, that there is a group of extremists, either Hayat Tahrir al-Sham or Hurras al-Din. They are the main issue for the Russian and the regime, and they have to eliminate them.
But tell me this, what is the strategic value in their minds that they actually target hospitals and kill civilians and hundreds of children?
You are talking about the area that have 4 million civilians.
Yes.
And the opposition forces, the fighters, they have direct connection with these civilians. They are basically family, come from northern Homs or Daraa or Damascus. So when you put pressure on the civilian, when you destroy the hospital, location for pharmacy and stuff like this, you will put more pressure on these civilians that will directly put pressure on the opposition and weaken it in a way, in a sense of way. But and also put again pressure on the Turk, because Turkey is a part of the DMZ agreement inside Idlib.
Yes, we're going to talk about it.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about it on the humanitarian side. Dima, we're seeing the international community staying silent yet again, except for the UN humanitarian chief. He says Syria could face war crimes after its attacks on especially Idlib. What do you think? What kind of an impact will this have in Syria's future?
Well, this is, first of all, the international community's silence is reflective of the political scene, which is at a deadlock. We have seen no progress at all in terms of the political track. And because the countries, the main players and actors and stakeholders in the Syria file have not come yet to an agreement on many things, especially concerning on the ground, the different zones. We have 5 different armies that are involved directly in Syria right now. We have the Turkish-US talks over the northeast, yes, and the Russian-Turkish guarantors in the northwest. So this is reflective of sort of a deadlock also within these different actors on the ground, an agreement on what to do and basically how to balance these powers.
So do you think these attacks are last resort to solve the deadlock in Idlib?
The Russians are looking at it as a way to pressure the different actors, at least we're talking here about the US and Turkey, and also indirectly the opposition to give in politically. And also we are looking, but this has failed before. This is not, and obviously as we saw from in the UN Security Council session happened, this is all being tagged and tallied, and this is not the first time that we're talking about accountability and the regime and its allies committing war crimes in Syria. But as long as there's no action, it stays merely on paper, and it's useless. And I think one of the reasons the Mr. Lockwood talked about this is because they feel some responsibility. The positions of a lot of these hospitals and schools were given to be avoided from shelling. And now they are directly targeting these points.
So, Navar, where is this crisis headed now? And Idlib, we're talking about Idlib. They say it is the last stronghold in the Syrian conflict. Is it?
This is the last area after the failing of the agreement that the Russian did with the northern Homs area and also Damascus. So basically, yes, this is the last stronghold for 4 million civilian, up to 4 million civilian. They don't have any B plan. That's why we saw a lot of organized defenses from the opposition forces just to block the Russian and the regime attack. Basically, these civilian, they don't have a B plan. What I mean, they cannot go to Afrin and Euphrates Shield. These two areas cannot handle more people, and their security situation is all critical. Plus, the Turk cannot accept more people with all the dilemma that's happening right now. So basically, this is the Russian will put more pressure, will keep attacking more, targeting civilian location so far from the battlefront, just like what they did in Ma'arat Nu'man, Kafar Nubbul. They are targeting locations that are very far from the battlefront just to put more pressure on the Turkish side, just to put more pressure on the civilian.
But
this is
hundreds
the main
of
target.
Thousands of people are escaping to the north.
To the north.
Yes,
this is
close to the Turkish border. So.
At the time being, they are escaping to the north. There is some organized camp for them. This is like, they are saying that it's a temporary solution, but if the campaign continued with this intensity from the Russian, it will directly then affect the Turk. Either the civilian will try to go to Afrin or even to Turkey in illegal way. They need to survive. They need,
So, Dima, do you believe this campaign will intensify in the coming period?
I don't think it's to anybody's benefit for this campaign to continue. As we have seen, without the Russian support, the regime could have not carried this on. And even with the Russian support and coverage from aerially with bombardment, the regime has not made any true gains. There was a lot of resilience from the opposition groups on the ground and supported by the Turkish guarantor, and also there was some US support. But what we're lacking right now is any action from the Europeans, and in fact the EU has had a negative impact here by pulling a lot of the assistance, the humanitarian assistance, and stopping a lot of their programming in this area, which has had a negative impact. But this is not sustainable, and I think a solution needs to be found, and not in that the regime taking this area, because as Nawar said, there are more than 4 million people in this area, and this is the last place they can stay within Syria.
Yeah, so it seems the Idlib crisis will not be resolved in the coming future, and we'll have to wait and see. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk. Appreciate it.
Thank you.